Good afternoon, everyone. We are the Solving Digital Identity panel. So we all know why identity is important, right? Security, super duper important today. Data breaches. Recent news on serious data breaches shows all the gaps in our system. We've been shown time again that every institution, whether public or private, is actually a identity management business. And with blockchain, for the first time ever, we have the capability of knitting together a real net of security. Privacy regains meaning with blockchain. And so today, we have these incredible panelists who are providing these solutions. And I'll let them introduce themselves to begin with, and then we'll launch into the discussion.
Hello, for those of you that weren't here 30 minutes ago, I'm Bruce Silcoff, CEO of Shyft. Shyft is leveraging proprietary blockchain technology to build a global distributed network for securely sharing trusted and compliant data.
Thanks. My name is Matthew Commons, CEO of Cambridge Blockchain. Cambridge Blockchain is a digital identity enterprise software company. And our software basically does three things. It stores personal data. It shares personal data, many times sharing that across companies or even across countries. And then number three, it validates that that data is correct with an attestation on a shared blockchain. Our earliest deployments are around identity of people. We'll be going live near the end of this year with about 600,000 end users in Luxembourg, basically customers of the main 6 retail banks there. And that's around know your customer data sharing. Going forward, we're also exploring certainly other geographies, but also identity of companies. This could be institutional investors, could be companies in a supply chain, and then a little bit further out, identity of devices and things. So these are some of the areas that have underlined our recent Series A, which was led by HCM, an affiliate of Foxconn. So we're looking to explore a number of things there, and eager to have continue the discussion here with the panelists today.
Thank you. My name is Brad Witteman. I am the CTO and co-founder of EverID. We make a system that is a transaction platform with built-in KYC. Our focus is the frontier markets of the world, where we're solving the problem of identifying the unidentifiable and giving them a digital wallet and a digital locker to store both cryptocurrency and public records of themselves.
All right, well, let's launch into some questions. What does identity on the blockchain mean, and where does it make sense?
Brad?
So the blockchain solves a lot of problems with identity, in our opinion. Identity silos have existed for the past 400 years, and those silos of identity prevent people from being able to portably demonstrate who they are and prove it across the globe. We think in the Western world that we've solved identity by giving people passports and little plastic cards with their photo on it, and that's not actually the reality. You can go onto the black market and purchase an American passport for about $10,000, a California driver's license for about $5,000. That's not a durable form of identity. EverID starts with the biometry of the individual, multiple points of biometry, and we build up the identity from there. We are 100% certain that you are you and you alone.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you think about identity and blockchain, obviously there's a whole host of different applications of identity, and it kind of connects into almost everything that we do. But when you're looking at, is this a good application for blockchain, you should really be thinking about, can you do this with a centralized database? And if you're looking at an identity ecosystem where there's one trusted party at the center, then probably makes sense to do it with a centralized database. If you're looking at sharing data across an ecosystem where all parties don't necessarily trust each other, and we see that in the banking sector, where not all banks want the other banks to know, who's opening accounts, who's doing trades with whom, that's where blockchain may make a lot of sense.
Those are great answers. Tough to add to that, other than the fact that we're leveraging smart contracts as part of our solution.
Can you expand on that, like what that means, leveraging a smart contract, especially, considering smart contracts and they're kind of early right now, right? Or would you agree with that statement?
100%, but smart contracts enable us to provide a more efficient way of transacting between two parties. It essentially removes the need for a middleman and allows you to have a validated exchange of data, in our case, more efficiently and for quicker and for less money and more securely.
All right, well, where do you see the space going in the next 3 years? Since we're starting off broad right now, let's kind of talk about landscape and what we're looking at.
Sure. I mean, from our perspective, we're not of the viewpoint that there's going to be one single identity architecture, whether blockchain-based or not blockchain-based, that is going to drop out of the sky and everyone's just going to get one common identity. We see identity definitely growing in specific ecosystems. For us, we have focused a lot on what we'd call regional know your customer utilities. So this is within a specific country, a group of financial institutions get together and they look at sharing data across that ecosystem. We've found it easier to get started in smaller geographies, like Luxembourg being the first, just because there's fewer stakeholders and you can get everyone together. And then over time, going to larger jurisdictions and certainly having these things connect. We're focused on one particular segment of the market, so that's kind of from our perspective, but I'm sure Bruce and Brad would have some complementary things in the areas of the market that they're looking at.
Yeah, that kind of, you're coming at it from an institutional perspective. Maybe we can address what it's like for users and what we can expect.
Sure. So just to riff a moment on Matt's comment, identity isn't an island and we can't approach it in a 20th century mindset. If we start to rebuild the 20th century's identity platforms, it doesn't make any sense. Being able to interoperate with many different identity platforms is what a distributed and decentralized system should be doing. So that's where we're building towards. We have a slightly different focus, but a similar distribution methodology, business to consumer. So both of us look to onboard a partner who is distributing down to the consumer themselves and enable that partner to do very specific things very efficiently.
And I know that various people are focusing on different geographies in the world, the unbanked, and you're in Luxembourg. Like, what are the kind of solutions that are similar across the board in places like Luxembourg? And, how are they dissimilar to Southeast Asia? What are the challenges, do you think?
So there's a lot of challenges in Southeast Asia, mostly revolving around individuals that have no identity or cannot demonstrate an identity document at all. So being able to bring someone in just with their biometry and just with whatever community or institutional attestations they can gather allows them to start with something and build up. In the Western world, generally people have some form of identity that they can associate with their blockchain identity and demonstrate that for other uses.
Interesting.
I'm going to add to that, actually. Not only are we talking about exchanging trusted data, but we're also talking about exchanging compliant data. And compliance, regulatory compliance, varies by jurisdiction and varies by sector. So we have to ensure that our networks support the framework in which our users are operating. So we're building a global network, but I still have to make sure that I am compliant within borders with which we're transacting.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. When we think about our business model, we're serving financial institutions ultimately, and they're heavily regulated. So, when we look at that, one of the reasons that we have driven, towards more of a country-by-country deployment model is just there's just one regulator in a country to get on board. Especially for sharing bank data and things like that, that's been easier to get started there. But certainly as we grow, we're looking at ways to connect across different geographies. And I think those are some of the big challenges in the future, where it's not just your ID in Germany or your ID in Indonesia or your ID in Bermuda, but really be able to exchange verified identity attributes and claims across those ecosystems. And it's not just a technology question, it's really also a regulatory question.
And that's actually a key point. We always talk about interoperability. If you're going to a more efficient system and a decentralized identity network, it has to be interoperable. You have to be able to exchange the data across institution and geographic boundaries. And that's where compliance understanding comes in. That's where the networks come into play. So interoperability, to me, is a key determinant to success.
That's definitely on the systems level.
Right.
Well, let's talk about the individual, right? So privacy is super, super important while we're ensuring security. What do you think are going to be the challenges as these structures expand? Because we out here are very, very familiar with them. I mean, most people have checking accounts, right? Most people in this room have IDs. What's it going to be like for the billions that are unbanked, for them to come online and start using these technologies and yet ensure privacy? What do you think are going to be the solutions?
So privacy is at the core of all the ways that we think about identity. And inside of our system, everything is atomically shareable, and both the sharing party and the recipient are recorded into every transaction. So we know what information you shared to whom and for how long, and if they took that information or just read it off their screen. So all different levels of how that information is being used is really important to the user and needs to be reflected back to the user in some form of history pane where they can see who's been accessing it and why. When you get to the larger segment of being able to portabilize my identity and carry it around and demonstrate my identity to multiple places, I need to have confidence that the other individual that I'm interacting with is who they say they are also. So if they are representing themselves to be an agent of a bank, I need to be able to validate that myself as the user. And all of that is part of the foundation of our system.
I think a big part of it is consent. I mean, we got to put control of one's identity in the hands of the person who owns it. So when you're building networks or solutions, you have to have a consent framework embedded in that network so that I know that I can control where I'm sharing my personal data with. I also want to know that the data is decentralized and not in too many locations. So from the individual's perspective, these new blockchain-based solutions will provide both of those things. They will enable you to have control, to provide consent to who owns your data, and will enable less people to actually hold your data. That's one of the biggest problems today, is that your data is everywhere.
Yeah, and everything's an open door, right? Yeah. Right now. So how is that going to translate into governance around the world?
So are you talking about blockchain governance, or?
I think, how does identity fit within the framework of governance currently, and then how is that going to shift in blockchain? What do you think?
So, I think for most of the world today, identity is really anchored on a government-issued ID, centrally issued by some state. And I think, at least for the developed world, we see that largely continuing, and even for the developing world, we still see a major role for government-issued ID, at least as a form of legal ID, maybe separate from social ID or other of that. And when you look at that framework, you can kind of blockchain-enable systems that build on top of that, like what we're doing in Luxembourg, that may be anchored to something that has official ID. The government of Luxembourg is one of the partners in our project. From the user perspective, I don't think end users certainly want to control more of their own data, and they want to not have their data be leaking out like the big Equifax hacks or Cambridge Analytica or what have you. But really, I think, depending on the different market segment, you're solving some specific pain points for them. You can be, saving costs. You can be reducing the time to get what they want, open accounts or what have you, and just reduce friction and, the kind of poor customer service that's currently there to get products and services and onboard, whether you're onboarding with an exchange or a financial product or service or what have you.
Sometimes in some of the frontier markets, the individual will be issued an ID and lose the ID. And then they don't really have never really found value in owning the ID, so they don't bother to get another one. So that individual, about 400 million people worldwide, is unidentified. On top of that, there's about 1.1 billion people that simply have no identity and were never recorded. So our focus is on bridging those people into the digital world, bringing them onto a system where they can start to not only control their identity and use an identity, but interact with a larger digital world.
Well, let's move into the technical framework of what that looks like. I know that there's utility tokens in here, and I know that Shyft is a utility token, yet Cambridge blockchain is not, and nor is EverID. What are the reasons for that, and how does it work with what you just described?
Do you want to start?
Sure. So we are a utility token. We simply use tokenization as a means to align the economic and political incentives of players in our world. And tokens are used as the fuel to make sure the network runs efficiently. Essentially, when you're doing a transaction and there's an exchange of data, you are purchasing that data from the holder of the data using tokens as the currency of exchange.
I think from our perspective, our business model is a little bit different in where there is both a Shyft network and an EverID network. There is no Cambridge blockchain network. We just make software, we license it to somebody else, and they can use our software to set up the identity network in that particular stakeholder set. So our customers are free to add a token if they want or not. To date, we focus primarily on the regulated markets. Those markets have been a little bit reluctant to embrace that. They typically want to minimize exchange risk as opposed to having that added into their model. I think over time, as there's additional regulatory clarity in different jurisdictions on this, maybe we'll see more of that in the regulated segment. But kind of where we are right now, we haven't seen the market demand.
So in EverID's world, we actually are a two-token system. In order to gain access to the API at a variable access, you have a utility token called the ID that allows partner organizations to access the API at varying levels of functionality and varying levels of frequency. You need to send 100,000 objects, that's one level. You need to send 10 million, that's a different level. On the platform itself is a native currency that's pegged to the US dollar that allows our partner organizations to drop money into one side of the system, shuttle it all the way across the world, and drop it into people's wallets in the local currency. So at the very last moment, it's exchanged out to the local currency and can be cashed out there, either as fiat or as a voucher.
Very cool. Maybe this is actually a good time to start talking also about your favorite use cases for what you're building.
I'll start. I'm thrilled that we're solving an economic problem by fixing compromised data. I talked about it earlier in my session, where every day 7.2 million data records are compromised a day. That's an epidemic. So we're solving that problem. What I really like, though, about what I'm doing, and when I wake up in the morning, what energizes me is the social impact part of the business. We are going to provide essential services to 1.1 billion people in this world that do not have access that don't have legal ID and that don't have access to those services. We're also providing banking services to 3.5 billion people. Half the world doesn't have access to banking or credit, and there's a problem. So fixing the social disparity in the world is really a good feeling. And people talk about blockchain and crypto as a get-rich thing and all about economic benefits and price of Bitcoin soaring. To me, it's not about that. And I'm talking personally now. I like the good that blockchain can do, and there is a ton of it. And blockchain will help create better communities. We're working with organizations like Tata in India that are trying to improve communities that are impoverished communities. That this keeps going on generation after generation. If your parents don't have legal ID, you don't have legal ID, and your kids don't have legal IDs. So unless we put an end to this right now, it's going to continue. So I wake up every morning energized by the fact that I'm going to leave a legacy and make a difference in this world.
So I think we share similar aspirations for where we would eventually like to see things going. In the near term, where we've prioritized things have been really in what can get into production right now. And I think there's so much in the blockchain space that in principle you could do on the blockchain, but it's in practice sometimes challenging to get the right stakeholders together. So when we think about what makes a good opportunity, a construct that we use is thinking about what we call a minimum viable ecosystem. So how many parties do you need to get together in order to launch a network and start it operating and really adding value? So we found that initially in Luxembourg, going forward into other generally small to medium-sized jurisdictions that are sharing data across financial institutions, and then over time, larger institutions. It's a lot easier to do something in Luxembourg with 6 banks that have a dominant market share than the US that has over 5,000 and multiple different regulators. The US is going to be a great market, but it's just a lot to bite off at one time.
I actually really like what both Bruce and I were saying. Our philosophy is very similar to Shyft. We're out there to move the needle for the people that can't move the needle for themselves. One of our favorite examples is UN agencies aren't able to give aid to an individual without identity. Without identity, they simply can't give you food, they can't give you a mosquito net, they can't give you things. Once you have an identity, you can start to play in this system where they can grant you access to specific things that you need: energy subsidies, food subsidies, shelter subsidies, etc. Some organizations lose between 18 and 20% of their transfer value to what they call fraud, leakage, and friction, which is graft and theft. And that graft and theft can be mitigated by a blockchain solution that is transparent to the organization and enables them to track where money is, who received it, who gave it out, and the entire chain of custody of that transaction.
So tell me about what you think are like the first 3 steps that we need to take globally in order to begin all of these solutions. What do you think?
Well, this is a huge undertaking that we're doing, so it's not going to happen overnight. But the one thing I know for sure is that we can't do it on our own. Okay, and we were talking about this before. It's not about going out and building your better mousetrap and hoping everyone gets it. It's collaborating with people that have really good solutions that could work together with you to build the best possible solution for the world. So, we're excited about collaborating with a lot of the experts in the field. There are a lot of good ideas, different visions on how things are going to get done, and yeah, it's about collaboration.
I would echo that, and I think something to add is really around regulatory engagement. We talked a little bit about regulators before, and today the government still does have a big role in identity, and certainly legal identity, which is not all of identity, but is an important component. So educating regulators on what's possible, and I think that there is an alternative to the way things are being done now. I think a lot of people around the world are really frustrated by the data privacy breaches, about the fact that we're generating so much data about ourselves but have so little control over it and so little knowledge about where that's going. And I think there's a lot of education to be done to say that, look, a different architecture is possible. And I think distributed systems in general offer a really encouraging path to that. And conferences like this, I think, are a great step in that direction.
Brad, could I just jump in on that for 1 second? I just want to add one thing. It takes legislation to make a lot of these changes happen. You need governments that buy into it from the top down. We were at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and we met with the Premier of Bermuda, David Burt. Here's a progressive thinking gentleman who said, I want to change the lives of all Bermudians. And he said, anyone that's interested in making that change happen, get on a plane and come to Bermuda from Davos. We got on the plane, and within 2 months, he wrote legislation that will change the future of everybody in Bermuda. That's what it takes to make a difference, from the top down.
I would echo the statements of both of these gentlemen. I believe that there will be different solutions in different geographies as the regulators and the legislators in each country decide on what makes sense for them. However, if you aren't building from the very beginning to be interoperable across these different platforms, all we're doing is repeating the same mistakes that were done in the 20th century.
Sure. I mean, you know, people take examples from the largest governments in the world. You brought up Bermuda. You know, it's great because they can implement it right now. What do you think are going to be the challenges for, you know, the United States of America to start to put the Social Security Administration, for example, on the blockchain? What do you think that that's going to look like going forward?
The first barrier is arrogance. They think they've already solved that. They think their system's totally secure. It's not. They think it's totally scalable and it can do all of these different things. They're going to hit a ceiling at some point. So the first thing is they need to realize that the solution that they have in place must be changed. Once they get over that and they start to fish around for a different solution, they'll come to a blockchain solution, which is not only better, longer term, but allows them to prevent a lot of the access issues that exist in centralized databases.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I probably wouldn't think that the U.S. Social Security Administration is necessarily going to be leading the charge in the first applications of this type of technology. So I would focus more on, hey, can you show an example of how that's working? We've been really encouraged by the strong data privacy regulations and the framework that you have coming out of Europe, you know, related to identity, but just, you know, other types of personal data. I mean, huge. I mean, it's a big deal. I mean, you can be fined now up to 4% of worldwide revenue for data privacy violations, and that's a big stick for major companies, and you know they're going to be using it, and you know showing that and having that regulatory action driving companies and governments to look at alternative architecture seriously. And actually, we hope, show that these can work in production, I think can, you know, help not just the Social Security Agency, but, you know, others around the world, you know, have some really tangible examples of what's possible.
You know, the United States is like an ocean liner trying to turn in a pond. You know, it's a big machine that's just difficult to navigate. That's why you see a lot of the smaller jurisdictions paving the way for the bigger ones. You see Bermuda, you see Serbia, you see Malta, Mauritius. You know, they have the ability to make decisions and to act quicker than the bigger ones. That's why the project, the Bermuda stack, we call it, we were calling it a sandbox for the planet, in that all the bigger jurisdictions are watching the smaller ones, taking a lead and learning from them, and then we'll follow suit. So the U.S. will have to play catch up.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we can give some ideas to everybody here on what they can do right now. Because I feel here in the United States of America, oftentimes they've lost hope. They think that this is it and this is how it's always going to be. What are steps that people can start taking today?
I actually would echo what Bruce was just saying. I think you need to go and look at something that's already in motion and already working. Something like Estonia, where President Tomas Hendrik put the entire country onto the blockchain. And they built an identity platform with a transaction system on top of it that enabled them to not only verify somebody's identity, but now transact value directly to them. Whether it's issuing a Social Security subsidy or their medical subsidy, it's all in the same platform and it's super scalable. So if you can go out and look at something that's already working, you as a legislator can think, I can do this here as well.
I'm going to say education's key. Okay, I'm an advisor to the Academy of Blockchain, and we released a statistic that said for every 14 jobs there are in the blockchain world, there's one person to fill it. You know, that's a huge pent-up demand that we could fill, but we have to teach future generations how to work with blockchain, how to understand it, and how to dream. The same way .com happened and how Silicon Valley right here led the way. We need to be the Jeff Bezoses of the world, the Steve Jobs, and dream and make those dreams a reality. We have people. Tech is borderless. You could do it anywhere, and it's not hard to teach people how to do it. The problem is we're still stuck in the same model of educating our children. It's still the geography, the history, we got to keep up with the times. We have to give them the tools to help shape the world. And
Well, we got to get you in touch with the mayor of San Francisco, right? Well, we probably should wrap up right now. So if you want to have any concluding remarks to everybody here, please.
Would you like to start?
Me?
No, Bruce.
yeah, this has been a great conference. I hope all of you have got a lot out of it. If you have any questions, I'll give you our website is Shyft, SHYFT.network. There's a contact opportunity there. Reach out, ask questions. We love talking about what we're doing. This is an 8-day-a-week job. This is traveling the world. People say, where do you live? It's airports. That's all we do, is we travel from place to place talking about the vision, the dream. This is the 4th industrial revolution. We are changing the world. Be a part of it. There's lots of opportunity. Ask questions, dive in deep, figure out if you want to change the world or you want to, make a lot of money, but there's opportunities abound.
Yeah. One thing I'll close with is that, identity is really core to everything that we are doing in the blockchain space and here at the conference. We've talked here on this panel primarily about identity as the problem, but identity is also really a critical element to enabling all the different types of exciting applications across many different industry sectors in the blockchain space. So just if you're looking at getting into blockchain technology or deepening your involvement with it, I think identity is a great place to focus because all the different blockchain use cases really need identity, and it's a huge problem in itself.
I totally agree with both of those statements. I'll leave you with a couple of things. We view identity as the atomic layer of all of the economies. If you can't verify an identity, you can't transact with them. By building the system that we've built, we've combined those two things. Visit EverID.net to learn a little bit more about what we're doing, and I appreciate all of your time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And to our panelists, thanks so much for your time
Thank
today.
you, Priya.
Thank you very much.